All right, we've got our new bolt-on traction bar kit here, and I will show you guys how they're built. To start with the bars, we have 1 3/4 chromoly tubing. It's a 120 wall tube, and then we have our flex joints. They're 2.5 inch flex joints. These have a Delrin bushing, and they're fully rebuildable. So if down the road you get any kind of wear in that, those bushings are easily replaceable just by removing a snap ring and changing out the bushings in there. Moving on to the axle brackets, we've designed a bolt-on axle bracket. It's a 2-piece clamshell. It's a matter of bolting them on and tightening up the bolts. Very simple install on those. The front brackets are also bolt-on, and we're fastening those with a combination of box bolts and self-threading bolts. So I'll show that in the install video then, how we use those. We have decorative plates to go on the side of the front brackets. That'll be an add-on option if you would like that. And then we'll also offer these standard powder coated black, or we can do custom colors as well. All right, we're gonna start our install by putting in the rear axle brackets. They just land here between the spring mount and the shock mount. So you set the top piece on there. You may have to tweak your brake line a little bit. This one looks like it's decent on this side. Passenger side is definitely usually needs tweaking. So set your top bracket on there, grab your bolts. You need to go from the bottom up with the bolts. The reason being, for the front, if you go from the top down, the bolt and the nut will not clearance the bar. From the bottom up. All right, once you have all the bolts started, go ahead and we're just gonna snug them up. Just make sure you pay attention and equally tighten them front to back so you don't have a big gap on one side or the other. Just try to keep those gaps as equal as possible. And here we're gonna not go fully tight on these until the traction bar end is installed. So we'll get these close to tight and then we'll install the traction bar. All right, when installing the traction bar, just pay attention, make sure you get your tag turned the right way. And then I like to turn the grease zerks down so that you can easily access those. We've got those good and tightened down, so I think we're done with this first one and we'll move on to the next side. All right, as you can see here, this side, the brake line is considerably tighter than on that side, so we're just gonna gently pull that thing out and get it out of the way. All right, that should do it. Once again, we're going to wait to fully snug those bolts until the rod end is in. That way we don't really have to fight this rod end in as hard. Alright, same thing here again. Make sure your tag is turned the right way. Get your grease zerk turned down. Alright, we got those good and tight, and we're ready to move on to the front. All right, moving on to the front, If you're on a lift, a post jack is really nice. We're going to put the bracket onto the bar and use that to locate it, and then we can hold it up with the post jack. If you're on the floor, just get a floor jack or a bottle jack or something like that. It can be really helpful. Obviously there's a right and a left. All right, now that we got the bracket in place, we're gonna start with the bolts on the side of the frame. I've got a center punch, so I'm gonna go ahead and get those center punched. The ones here on the side are going to just use the self-threading bolts. So all we need to do is drill a 21/64 hole, and then we can run these in with an impact. Always recommend starting with a pilot hole. Helps you keep things centered up better, and it makes your hole drilling a lot easier once you get to the bigger bit. So start with a small bit and get some pilot holes drilled. Once again, this is a 21/64 drill bit, and that is fairly size crucial so that you get the correct thread engagement on the bolt. All right, now you just simply run the bolt into the frame. All right, now that you have those in, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna let the bar down and get it out of the way to do the bottom bolts. All right, for the bottom, we're going to use box bolts. So these are also fairly simple. It's gonna require a 9/16 hole to put these in. So we'll start with the same process. We'll do a pilot bit, and then I'll work my way up to a 3/8, and then we'll finish it off with a 9/16 hole. All right, now that we've got the holes drilled, we're gonna go ahead and install the box bolts. And in order to install these, you need to use a wrench to hold this flange, and then put a socket on the bolt, and it is a wedge anchor style fastener. So it will pull this wedge down in there and expand the bolt. So once this is in, you will not get it out without drilling it out. So make sure that you're done taking the bracket off of the truck, or else you'll need to ruin your fastener in order to move things. So we'll get this thing up in there. All right, box bolts are good to go. So at this point, if you have the decorative side plate, you'll want to go ahead and take the self-threading bolts out of the side. All right, so when putting on the decorative plate, before you fully tighten the top bolts, make sure you start this bolt, or else you might not have the alignment quite right on this one. So get the rod end back up in there and get the bolt in, then you can go ahead and tighten your frame bolts again. All right, got that side done. We'll move on to the passenger side. When you put the second side up, just spend a little bit of time, do a little bit of measuring, make sure that both of your bars are adjusted equal length so that your front brackets get mounted in the same location. We'll just go ahead and repeat the process that we did on the other side. We'll start here on the side. Make sure the bracket is tight up against the frame on the bottom before you drill your holes in the side of the frame. Really, the most difficult part of this install is getting the 9/16 holes drilled. Big holes are never fun to drill. Just a couple of tips on that is go in small increments. Start small, work your way up. On these holes, I used 4 different size drill bits. I went, you know, a small pilot hole, went up to 3/8, then 1/2 inch, and then 9/16. So just make sure you take steps, especially on your 9/16 drill bit. Don't spin it super fast. It's a quick way to burn it up. Use some good lubricant. Keep that bit from getting hot. So just go slow. I like to put my drill in high and half throttle it because I hate low on a drill because it tends to break your wrists when things grab. So just take your time, go in steps, lubricate the bit, and don't overspin it. This flange will not spin once you have it tightened down, so if you're OCD and you like things lined up right, get those flats lined up nice before you get them tightened down. All right, now that we've got all the brackets on, we need to go through and make sure that all of our bolts are tight. I haven't tightened any of the main bolts on the traction bars up, so we'll go through and we'll do that first. All right, now the most important part of tightening things up is we need to make sure that all of the jam nuts are tight. If you leave a jam nut loose, you will end up ruining threads on these rod ends eventually. So not only can you ruin the threads on the rod end, you may also ruin the threads in your tube end, and literally your entire set of bars will be junk and need to start over. So very critical to make sure all of these jam nuts are tight, and when you're doing maintenance on your truck, it's always a good idea to check and make sure that none of them have come loose. All of these bars have a right hand and a left hand end on it. A good way to tell which end it is, the left hand nuts all have little nicks on the corners, so if you want to know which way you need to turn it, that's a good indicator. All right, when you're tightening up these jam nuts, obviously you want to, if you have a tag on your bar, make sure it's turned out and lined up correctly. Start in the front, get it snugged up, and when you start tightening it down, you'll notice that the rod end will want to start spinning with it. So go ahead and get the thing snug, let it roll over like that, and then before you go to the back, roll that thing back over to where it's flat and in the middle of its range of motion, and then come to the back and tighten up the back jam nut. And then when that swivels around, now you can see both of them are at full extension at the same time, and you won't have one that's full crooked. So go ahead and just let that rotate over to the side while you get them good and snug on both ends. Then once they're tight, just go ahead and roll that thing back to the middle of its range of motion and you're good to go. So a couple squirts of grease on each grease zerk and this install should be done.